What's up, APUSH people? Today we're going to be taking a look at the DBQ portion of the APUSH exam. We're going to be breaking down all of the things you need to do to get the high score in May. So what is this DBQ? I know you probably saw that and thought, what is this, a new gang, DBQ? And here it is, it's a question.
It's the questions, it's the questions, boy, it's the questions.
It's a document-based question that is going to be 25% of the total exam score. So it's really important. There's going to be a prompt, a question. There may be more than one part to the prompt or question, so make sure you answer the entire thing that they're asking, and you're going to be provided a set of documents. No more than 7 documents is what I've been told, and you're going to have 55 minutes to complete. This is the DBQ on the most basic level, but remember, nothing in APUSH is basic, because no matter which question you get, you're going to need to show some skills.
Skills.
The DBQ will have one of the following historical thinking skills as its main focus. For instance, you may get a question about historical causation. Why did stuff happen? You need to break down the reasons why it happened, the impact of those things, the long-term and the short-term consequences. Another skill you may be tested on is patterns of change and continuity over time. What changed? What stayed the same? Why did it happen? What was the extent of those changes? Are some of the things you're going to need to be able to do in that type of question. You may get a question that tests your skill of comparison. You need to identify similarities, differences between perhaps time periods, regions of the country, you name it. Interpretation. How are events perceived? Why do different historians or individuals perceive historical events in different ways? How has interpretations changed? You may need to identify different viewpoints. And then finally, periodization. Why do historians call certain periods, such as the era of good feelings, the progressive era? Are these terms appropriate? Are there turning points in periods that cause change? And so on. No matter what question you get, all DBQs will also always assess the historical thinking skills of historical argumentation. You're going to have to look at conflicting evidence and create an argument, appropriate use of relevant historical evidence. You're going to need to be able to show that you're able to use evidence from documents, outside information, to draw conclusions and make an historical argument, contextualization, and synthesis. We're going to take a look at both of those in a little bit. Keep in mind, this is going to be difficult for most of us. It's going to be a struggle, but we got your back here at Jose Productions, and we are in training now, getting ready for the exam in May. So here's the basics. You must formulate a thesis that answers all parts of the question and support it with historical evidence. The documents, you must analyze and synthesize historical sources and include outside information as historical evidence to support your awesome, dope thesis. Now that's the basic, but we're not trying to be basic. We want to master the DBQ. We want to get that score of
the Magnificent 7.
7. That's how many points you can get on the DBQ. Let's try to get them all. Here is how your essay is going to be graded. First things first, all right.
To that I say, all right.
Your first point is in part A of the rubric, which is thesis and argument development. You can get 1 point if you present a thesis that makes a historically defensible claim, something that you can prove with your evidence, and you respond to all parts of the question. So make sure you're answering the question they're asking you, you're staying within the time frames, and you're giving them an argument that you can support and that you're going to fight for throughout your essay. It's important to note that the thesis must consist of 1 or more sentences located in one place. We're going to tell you put it in the intro. It doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense in the conclusion. Now, remember, your thesis must be strong, direct, and clear. If you do those things, you're going to get 1 point. Now, what's that second point? This is where you get fancy.
Oh, you fancy, huh? Oh, you fancy, huh? Oh, you fancy, huh?
The second point in part A is actually for argument development. In other words, your thesis is fancy. It takes into account, it develops and supports a cohesive argument that recognizes and accounts for historical complexity, by explicitly illustrating, and you could read the rest. What this means is you will have a thesis that is complex, that it, for example, may address a counter argument, and you substantiate this kind of complexity throughout your essay, throughout your writing. Not only are you putting forth an argument, you're recognizing contradictions, and you're qualifying the evidence you're using, and you're explaining it on a much higher level. This must not only be done in the intro paragraph, but throughout. For example, you may argue some event in history is a massive turning point, but you may qualify it with, well, it wasn't a complete turning point, and here's some evidence that suggests why. So that's the first 2 points you can get in Part A of the rubric. Now, a really important point to keep in mind is not only did I think that AP stood for Advanced Placement, so did Keanu Reeves, and our mind was blown when we realized it actually stands for Answer the Prompt. And I mention this because a lot of students answer the question that is not being asked by the College Board. So make sure, once again, you stick to the time period, you answer the question. If there's many components to the question, you answer the whole thing. So what about those documents? And here's another mistake people make. The DBQ is not an essay about the documents. You're not going to write an essay in which you say document 1 is about this and document 2 is about this. These documents exist for you.
What can you prove, huh? Nothing. Where's your evidence, huh?
It's right there.
To analyze the documents and to use them to provide evidence to support your thesis. So once again, don't summarize the documents. Do not quote them or Denzel Washington will smack you. Don't explain the documents. Don't jump around from the documents. Your goal is to make connections between the documents, to create an argument, and to support your claim. Which leads us to Part B of the rubric. Document analysis, you can get 2 points for this section. And remember, just like the Hunger Games, we are hungry for those points. So you can get 1 point if you utilize the content of at least 6 of the documents to support the stated thesis or relevant argument. You do that, you hit the bullseye. So once again, the documents that you're going to look at, there's going to be a wide variety of types of documents. You're going to want to note who's the author, what's the point being made, what's going on during that time period, and then you're going to try to figure out how does that document help support your position or your thesis. On to the second point in Part B of the rubric. You can get a second point if you explain the significance of the author's point of view. You can do that. 2, author's purpose. 3, historical context. And or 4, audience for at least 4 of the documents. If you do those things, you get the second point. Now, this extended analysis only needs to be done with 4 of the documents. So for example, number 1, you could do author's point of view. You know, who is the author? How would you describe them? How are they in relation to what's going on in history? Number 2, the author's purpose. What was the reason? What were they trying to accomplish? Number 3, historical context. What bigger events or trends are going on during this time period? And or number 4, who is the audience of this piece of work? Now, if you're having a little bit of a overload and going, what the heck is this point all about? Just think about hippos.
Only a hippopotamus will do.
So we talk about hip in APUSH, so you can do historical context, intended audience, point of view, purpose. You do this for at least 4 of the documents. You are going to get that additional point. The O in HIPPO stands for organization. How are you going to use the document in your essay? So remember, hippos have 4 legs. You need to do this extended analysis for 4 of the documents. You may want to do more just to be safe, but don't forget to hip. That's section B of the rubric. Section C has to deal with my favorite thing, context.
Which is a little strange, because context is important.
Section C of the rubric is using evidence beyond the documents. You can get 2 points in this section, and really the first one is all about contextualization for 1 point. This basically means you provide historical background. You situate the argument by explaining the broader historical events, developments going on during the question's time period. You're providing the reader with historical background. You're setting your essay up, and really this should be done in the opening sentences of your DBQ. This needs to be multiple sentences. You can't just do one sentence. That's not going to cut it. You're going to open up your essay, and if you want to think about contextualization in a simple way, it's kind of like what they do in the movie Star Wars back in the late 70s. They open up the movie, they do the screen crawl with all the background information, so when the movie starts, you know exactly what's going down. You know all the things that have been happening to understand the movie, but in this case to understand why your thesis is what it is. Another reminder from Denzel Washington: you must include outside information when supporting your thesis. So you can't just use the documents, you can't just set up the contextualization. You need,
It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. Yeah.
outside information to advance your thesis. Which brings us to the second point in Part C.
Bring 'em out, hey.
You can get a point for evidence beyond the documents. This is the outside information, provides an example or additional piece of specific evidence beyond those found in the documents to support or qualify the argument. In terms of how much outside information, we're talking 2 solid pieces. The more though, the better. And keep in mind, you can't just blurt out something or mention it briefly. You have to bring it back to how that outside information supports or qualifies your argument. And the final point for the DBQ: synthesis. Part D of the rubric, you get 1 point if you do synthesis, and this means extends the argument by explaining the connections between the argument and one of the following. So you have some choice here. A development in a different historical period. This, I think, is the best way to earn your synthesis point. So if your essay is about period 2 in the colonial period, maybe you compare it to something that happened in the 20th century. Think about this saying, like in kind, but different time. You can also compare it to a different situation, era, or geographical area. Or, for example, a course theme and/or approach to history that is not the focus of the essay, such as political, economic, social, cultural, or intellectual history. So if you're asked to analyze political and economic, perhaps you bring in the cultural component to get that synthesis point. But once again, I really suggest that you go with a different historical time period. If the prompt is about the struggle between the federal and the state governments, and you're comparing it 19th century, perhaps you show an example in the 20th century of something very similar between the struggle between the feds and the states. Bam, you got your synthesis point, and we're really suggesting you put the synthesis component of your essay at the end of your essay. Now that's a whole lot of information on how to get the 7 points. We're going to have other videos that explain things in way more detail, but a quick DBQ overview. So first paragraph, you should shoot for contextualization. Remember a couple of sentences setting this whole thing up. Then at the end of the first paragraph, or perhaps you want to kind of drop it down to a second paragraph so the reader doesn't get confused, you're going to introduce your super awesome complex thesis. You can possibly get 2 points if you argue it throughout your essay. So there's 3 right there. In your body paragraphs, you're going to be proving your thesis with historical evidence. You're going to use at least 6 documents to support your thesis. You'll get 1 point. Remember, you're not explaining the documents, but you're showing how it supports your argument. You're going to do a specific HIP analysis of at least 4 of the documents. More is better, but 4 is the minimum to get the point. You're going to provide some outside information in those body paragraphs supporting your thesis. Do at least 2, but more the better. And in the closing paragraph, you're going to drop in your synthesis, comparing it most likely to a different time period. Make it relevant, make it good. Bam, you got 7 points. We know the DBQ is going to be a struggle, but remember, we are doing this for America. And if you go to apushexplain.com, we're going to have more videos explaining things in way more detail. If you like the video, click like and make sure you subscribe. Have a beautiful day. Peace.